Hi, I'm Dylan Thomasoff, and today I'm here to present to you the lessons of the Native American experience. Because of the duration of the Native American experience, I'm going to break it down into four eras and try to stick to the most distinctive and decisive events that pertain to genocide. The first era is the introduction to Europeans and the beginning of colonialism in America. The second era is the expansion of America that led to wars between the two societies. The third era is the California Gold Rush. The fourth area is the assimilation of the Native American people through education. Area of colonialization. The first contact with Europeans was formerly the Vikings. Later, in 1598, the Spanish established a colony. After the Spanish came the Puritans, who began the waves of settlers that created resource wars between the two groups. All Europeans shared a belief in being superior to the savage natives. This resulted into their trading partnerships never growing into truly fruitful partnerships and instead were plagued by isolated attacks that created more mistrust and false images and stereotypes between the groups. On top of the rocky relations that Europeans and natives experienced, in 1520 the Spanish had introduced smallpox to the continent. The Spanish presence is the first European contact to provide a devastating impact upon the native populations. After their colony was established, there was an increase in conflict with the Pueblo. Conflict was partially driven by the Spanish's want to remove the religion of Casina and replace it with Christianity. For 13 years, the Spanish attempt to regain the colony after they were driven out of it by the Pueblo. The only reason that they were able to regain it was when the Pueblo people lost their unity and fell apart. This led to 40 religious leaders being arrested in 1675, three of which were hung. The most devastating effects of this interaction is not the years of conflict, but the release of disease that began to spread across the continent. Now we will look at the Spanish interactions with the Aztecs. This began in 1519 with Spanish conquistador Hernan Cortes leading a small group of 500 men to conquer the Yucatan Peninsula. As Cortes made his way through Aztec territory trying to get to the capital, he forced some Aztecs into being mediators and interpreters who helped organize allies within the Aztec Empire to overthrow it from within. This use of people within the indigenous population being used draws similarities to how the Nazis used Jewish community leaders to help organize the removal of Jewish individuals during the Holocaust. Cortes was soon greeted by an additional Spanish ship that landed. Cortes went back to the ship not knowing that there was an infected slave that had smallpox. He was able to pick up the disease and transmitted it through the Aztec population. Due to the devastating effects of this transmission, the Aztecs were nearly wiped out, and in the years that followed, they went from a population of roughly 25.2 million down to 1.1 million. For the accidental epidemic, Cortes would have never been successful in overthrowing the Aztecs, who were a society of warriors. When we look at this event, there is a clear lack of intent for genocide, as Cortes was looking to subjugate and exploit the Aztec population, not kill them. In another case that is very similar to the Aztecs, we'll look at the Incas. The Incas were the first victims of the spread of the original outbreak from the Spanish colonies. In 1527, the emperor had contracted smallpox through his family during travels and died and created a open power grab within the empire. By 1532, after the Civil War had finished, Francisco Pizarro took 200 men and overthrew the once grand empire with ease after it had lost half of its population to smallpox. Again, we find a case of accidental extermination of a people they wished to subjugate, which is not genocide. In the first era, the closest act that we find to the current legal definition of genocide is Pontiac's War, in which there were letters shared between two individuals, Amherst and Bouquet, that they discuss whether you should use smallpox to lower the natives' population. No letters were ever shared confirming its use nor the effectiveness of the effect, if used. In this era, a more damning case is that of Captain Sear, who gave 2 blankets and a handkerchief from a hospital that was experiencing a smallpox outbreak. It is, however, not clear whether these are true genocidal intents, but the items were taken from known infected people. Letters from others and his own diary show conflicting arguments on whether he was trying to commit genocide. Damage to coastal Native Americans is astonishing. 9 out of 10 of the Native Americans that lived on the coast died. This is not just from smallpox alone, as the Europeans introduced 16 diseases including smallpox. The Europeans did have a basic understanding of disease, but they were unaware of how vulnerable and how little biodiversity was within the Native American population that caused these diseases to be quite effective, even when they were normally non-lethal to Europeans. And yet again, to summarize, the Europeans were not trying to annihilate the Native Americans with disease, as they wanted to exploit this workforce. Now I will address the Plains War era. This is an era of largely of the culmination of generations of building aggressions and increasing internal pressure in America to expand. That does not mean it is purely innocent period of interaction. There are 3 events to focus on during this time, which are Wounded Knee Massacre, 7th Cavalry Attack, and the Sand Creek Massacre. In this next section, I will tell the events out of chronological order, but instead in importance and most closely relating to events of genocide. First, we'll deal with Wounded Knee, which occurred on December 29th, 1890. Flames of this fire were fueled by a new dance called the Ghost Dance. This dance was used to further other the Native Americans. The previous warfare that each side had engaged in with each other. The tensions were higher than ever because of the rumors of this dance. Colonel James Forsyth ordered Bigfoot and his men to be disarmed, and during this altercation a gunshot of unknown origins went off and sparked fire to this powder keg. Between 153 to 300 natives were killed in what appears to be the final acts of the Indian Wars. The next event I want to discuss is the 7th Cavalry Attack. This was done by George Armstrong Custer on November of 1868. He was ordered to head south and kill all warriors and ponies and bring back the women and children. Instead, he found a peaceful camp of Cheyenne and attacked. I cannot help but think that this is reminiscent of the Serbian death squads in Bosnia. The final of the 3 is the Sand Creek Massacre. This is an event that began being escalated in the spring and summer of 1864 by the Colorado newspapers running stories about natives attacking whites. This propaganda is equivalent to Rwanda's RTLM radio. The papers mocked Colonel John M. Chivington and his regiment, calling them the Bloodless Third. Chivington was already a man who was deeply genocidal in ideology and wanted to kill all natives, even infants. Luckily, though, Captain Silas Soule disobeyed Covington's orders and informed the Army of Covington's actions. This led to the Army and a congressional subcommittee, both investigating, issuing harsh words, but never filing any charges against this clear act of genocidal massacre, but is not a prolonged action and does not have a formal body leading it. Now we finally move into the Gold Rush era. Gold was discovered in California in 1843, and tensions quickly escalated between the diggers and the natives. It was not until 1849 when natives became tired of the exploitation and being raped by 2 men that they turned on them and killed the 2 men. This sparked the powder keg in California, and by May of 1850 the army arrived and indiscriminately killed Native Americans within their village. This was not an isolated event of violence against California natives that was sanctioned by the California government, and the federal government turned its face. Between 1851 and 1852, California paid $1 million in expenses for native killing. leaving approximately 20,000 natives left in California by 1900 at the end of the onslaught. As you can see on the image on the left, there is a vast amount of action that was carried out in this short period of time in California. It was flamed by two governors who seen no other option but extermination for the natives, and it was not until the early 1850s that the federal government sent in negotiators. Even the attitude of the negotiators was that of extermination or assimilation. They were forced to accept a resolution that created 5 reservations that had federal protection. This era cannot help but remind me of the Hutus' experience of the media driving them into a frenzy, causing many to brag about their kill counts, which was seen here in California as many bragged about how many native scalps they had claimed. At the end of the extermination in California marked the beginning of the era of assimilation. Henry Pratt had experienced in California the education of natives. He, in 1878, provided the first round of natives with a proper boarding school. This solution was so well liked that it led to federal funding in 1882. This became the choice model for how to solve the Indian problem through the Southwest and Northwest. It did come at a cost to the natives as the federal government sold their land to pay for the cost, very reminiscent of how the Nazis forced the Jews to sell all their belongings and leave the country, minus the extermination element of the genocide. In the era of assimilation, the Native Americans experienced double killing by being forced to face those that had inflicted the trauma upon them and enduring while their culture was being erased. They were forced to accept the perpetrators in their daily lives and live in fear of what could happen next as the Tutsi do. This era is unique when compared to contemporary genocide as it does not have extermination as the ultimate goal. This is without a doubt cultural genocide. It was not until 1981 that the UN made a declaration on ethnocide offering hollow words of protection of institutional cultural destruction. On September 13, 2007, the UN also made a declaration on the rights of indigenous people. Both these declarations lack the formal backing of the original genocide laws that were backed with force, meaning that there is no enforcement nor force to use when these two declarations are being trampled upon. As you can see on this slide, even true massacres are recognized in a false sense, being called a battleground in this monument in America. The issues moving forward is there is a lack of substantial enforcement of new resolutions and the narrow legal definition of genocide. It is left wide open for people to use the loopholes of decentralization to avoid certain applications of the law. There is also clear lack of intent in many cases, which leaves the discussion open for degrees of genocide that Israel Carney speaks of. It would be similar to how there are different degrees of homicide. Because of the rather low rate of charges being filed in contemporary cases of genocide, I feel this emboldens future perpetrators. As for how to correct the issue, do you feel that the United States should be more proactive in recognizing and properly identifying its own injustices? Also, should the UN adopt broader legal definitions of genocide that would work by the degree of crime committed? Thank you for watching and have a great day.